Farmer buys sick ox out of pity, unknowing it held a secret. Walter Thompson couldn't understand why he felt so drawn to that nearly lifeless ox at the small rural auction in Hope Springs. All the other ranchers kept their distance from the animal with the strange bluish mark on its back, but something in the creature's sorrowful eyes touched the old farmer's heart deeply. $50! Walter shouted, raising his calloused hand in the air just as the auctioneer was about to close the bidding without any takers. Silence fell over the barn. Other farmers looked at Walter with a mix of pity and mockery. After all, what would a 75-year-old man do with an ox that could barely stand? "Sold to old Walter," announced the auctioneer, banging his gavel with obvious relief at being rid of the problem. Hank Wilson, a neighboring farmer and longtime friend, approached Walter as he signed the purchase receipt. "Lost your mind, partner? That beast won't last a week," Hank remarked, scratching his graying head. Walter adjusted his worn hat and looked at his friend calmly. "Some creatures deserve a second chance, my friend, just like I got when folks thought I wouldn't make it after last year's stroke." And so old Walter, widowed for 10 years and considered too stubborn by his family, took home the only animal no one wanted at that Kentucky livestock auction. The drive back to Pleasant View Farm was quiet. Jesse, the young man who had helped Walter since his youth, carefully steered the old pickup down the dirt roads, glancing in the rearview mirror at the ox lying in the truck bed, covered with a tarp to protect it from the night dew. "Old Walter, you sure you don't want me to take this animal straight to the slaughterhouse? It'll be nothing but trouble nursing it back," Jesse said, trying to be practical. "Don't even think about it, boy. If I wanted it dead, I wouldn't have bought it," Walter replied, gazing out the window at the first stars appearing in the August sky. When they arrived at the property, a small brick house with a porch surrounded by jaboticaba trees and a well-kept yard, Walter had Jesse help him take the animal to the stable nearest the house. "I'll need clean water, fresh hay, and those leftover medicines from when Daisy had birthing trouble," Walter instructed, already spreading fresh straw on the ground for the animal to lie on. "You're going to tend to it yourself?" Jesse asked, surprised. Who else would want to care for this poor thing? The next morning, Linda, Walter's daughter-in-law, arrived at the farm with her 2 teenage children, Emma and Ethan. Since losing her husband, Walter's only son, 5 years ago, Linda had managed the family finances and often tried to convince her father-in-law to sell the farm and move to town. "Father Walter, what's this about buying a sick ox? Jesse called me worried," Linda said, finding her father-in-law in the EO stable, where he was applying a homemade salve to the strange bluish mark on the animal's back. "Good morning to you too, Linda," Walter replied without looking up from his task. Linda stepped closer cautiously, grimacing at the sight of the animal's condition. "How much did you spend on this?" "It's got a name. I decided to call him Hope." "You named a sick ox?" Linda shook her head, exasperated. "Father Walter, with all due respect, ever since Mother Dorothy passed, you've been making one strange decision after another." Walter finally looked up at his daughter-in-law. "Linda, this farm is still mine. The money I spent was mine, and how I spend it is my business alone. It's all our business. Have you forgotten half your pension goes to medicine? If you keep spending on sick animals, how will we afford your heart treatment?" Walter sighed, feeling the weight of age in his bones. At 75 years old, he fought daily to maintain his independence and the farm he had built with his wife over decades. "Don't start lecturing me this early in the morning, girl. Go make us some coffee while I finish up here." Linda walked off grumbling, and Walter turned his attention back to the ox. Strangely, the animal seemed to recognize him already, following him with its eyes as he moved around the stable. "Don't mind her, Hope. You'll get better, I promise." For the next 2 weeks, Walter devoted himself entirely to the ox's care. He woke up multiple times during the night to check on it, fed it a special herbal mixture he'd learned from his father, and talked to it like it was a person. Jesse watched with a mix of respect and concern. "Old Walter, it's not good for you to lose sleep like this. Your blood pressure's gonna rise. Don't you worry, son. Too much sleep is for folks who got nothing left to do in life." Surprisingly, the ox began to improve. First, it managed to stand for longer periods. Then, it started eating with more appetite, and finally, the mysterious bluish mark on its back began to change. "This ain't no sickness," Walter murmured to himself as he examined the mark. Looks more like a die, like someone marked this animal on purpose. It was Emma, his 19-year-old granddaughter, studying her first year of veterinary medicine at Yale, the state college, who confirmed his suspicions when she visited the farm over the weekend. "Grandpa, this is some kind of artificial marking. Look here," she said, dabbing the edge of the mark with an alcohol-soaked cotton ball, which caused it to fade slightly. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now back to the story. "And there's something else strange," Emma continued, pointing to a nearly imperceptible tiny drawing within the blue mark. "This looks like a symbol, not just some random disease mark." Walter adjusted his glasses and leaned in for a closer look. His heart raced as he recognized what he saw. "Good Lord Almighty," he muttered, taking a step back. "What is it, Grandpa?" "Do you know this mark?" Walter ran a hand through his unkempt white beard, trying to gather his thoughts. "This mark, it's like the one my father used on his cattle back in the 60s, a triangle with a spiral inside. It was the mark of the special lineage he bred." "Special lineage?" Emma asked, intrigued. Walter sat on a small stool, feeling the weight of memories. "Your great-grandfather was known as the Cattle Whisperer. He managed to develop a lineage resistant to foot and mouth disease at a time when the illness was wiping out entire herds around here. But when he passed, we had to sell nearly all the cattle to pay off debts, and the lineage was lost. At least that's what I thought all these years." Emma looked at the ox with renewed interest. "Grandpa, this is incredible. If it's true, this animal could have huge genetic value." "I don't care about value. I just care that this ox might be a piece of our family's history coming back home." That night, as he ate dinner with his grandchildren in the simple red-floored kitchen, Walter felt more alive than he had in years. He told stories about his father and the prosperous days of Pleasant View Farm, when they'd had over 200 head of cattle. "Your great-grandfather used to say the land speaks to those who know how to listen. He was the one who noticed the cattle grazing in a certain part of the farm almost never got sick. He studied everything until he figured out the plants in that pasture had special properties. Ethan, 17, who usually preferred staying on his phone, paid attention to his grandfather's words. And how did he mark the special cattle, Grandpa? With a mixture made from a bluish plant that grows in the hollows. The mark lasted for months and didn't hurt the animal. It was his way of separating the special ones without branding them, with a hot iron. As the bull's recovery progressed, news about the animal with the strange mark began to spread through the region. One September morning, a sleek black car pulled up in the farmyard. A man in a suit, despite the heat, stepped out accompanied by 2 assistants. "Good morning. I'm looking for Mr. Walter Thompson," the man said, removing his sunglasses. Walter, who was in the yard harvesting cassava, straightened up with some difficulty. "That's me. How can I help you?" "My name is Jonathan Blackwell from New Frontier Agribusiness. I heard you acquired an animal with very unique characteristics, and I'm interested in making an offer." "I'm not selling anything," Walter replied curtly. The businessman smiled, unfazed by the refusal. "You haven't even heard my proposal yet. I'm willing to pay $50,000 for the bull." Walter nearly dropped the bucket of cassava. "50,000? For a bull I bought for $50? You must be joking." "I'm very serious, Mr. Thompson. In fact, that amount would just be the beginning of our partnership." Suspicious, Walter invited the man to sit on the porch, more out of politeness than interest. "What kind of partnership would that be?" Jonathan Blackwell explained that his company was developing a cattle genetic improvement project and was searching for specimens with specific traits. "We believe your bull may carry genes from a rare lineage we've been tracking for years. If we're right, he could be worth far more than what I'm offering." "And how did you hear about my bull?" The businessman hesitated briefly. "The world of breeders is small, Mr. Thompson. Word gets around." Something about the explanation didn't sit right with Walter. How could anyone know about the bull so quickly? And even stranger, why would anyone offer so much money for an animal everyone had considered worthless just a month ago? "I appreciate your interest, Mr. Blackwell, but like I said, I'm not selling." The businessman left a card on the porch table and stood. "Think it over, Mr. Thompson. My offer stands." Oh, and if you change your mind, or if anything happens to the animal, call me immediately. We're very interested in his DNA, regardless of his condition." Those last words left Walter uneasy. After the car drove off, he went straight to the barn to check on the bull. He found Jesse cleaning the stall. "Old Walter, that man in the suit really wanted to buy Hope." "He did, offered a fortune." "And you didn't take it?" Jesse asked, astonished. "There's something fishy about all this, Jesse. I'll figure out what before making any decisions." That same night, Walter was awakened by a noise in the yard. Peering out the window, he saw a faint light coming from the direction of the barn. He dressed quickly and grabbed the old shotgun he kept in the closet, more to scare than to actually use. As he approached the barn, he heard voices. Carefully, he peeked through a crack in the door and saw two men trying to loop a rope around the bull's neck. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Walter shouted, brandishing the shotgun. The men startled and ran off, vanishing into the darkness before Walter could see their faces. The bull seemed agitated but unharmed. The next morning, Walter reported the incident to Sheriff Morgan, who promised to increase patrols in the area but didn't show much interest in the case. Walter, with all due respect, it was probably just some kids playing a prank." "A prank?" "They were trying to steal my bull." The sheriff shrugged. "If you say so, but since when do thieves care about a sick bull? He's not sick anymore, and someone's mighty interested in him." When the sheriff left, Linda arrived with a worried expression. "Father Walter, are you all right? I heard about the attempted robbery and came right over." "I'm fine, dear, just a little tired." "This just proves what I've been saying. You can't stay out here alone anymore. You need to sell this farm and come live with us in town." Walter shook his head. "We've talked about this. I'm not leaving." Linda sat beside her father-in-law and took his hands. "It's getting dangerous. First, that mysterious businessman shows up out of nowhere. Then they try to steal the bull. Have you thought that you might be in real danger?" "I've lived a long life, Linda. I'm not afraid of such things." "But I'm afraid of losing you." Linda's voice cracked. "After Robert passed, you're the only father I have left." Walter hugged his daughter-in-law, feeling her tremble. Despite their frequent arguments, he knew she genuinely cared. "Let's make a deal. I'll ask Jesse to stay here for a while, until we figure out what's going on." Somewhat reassured, Linda returned to town, promising to send Ethan over on the weekend to help his grandfather. Walter, however, couldn't stop thinking about the strange interest in the bull. He decided to search for answers in his own memories. The next day, with Jesse's help, Walter rummaged through the old barn, where he kept his father's belongings. Inside a wooden crate, he found yellowed photographs, old documents, and a notebook. "Look at this, Jesse, my father's farm journal." Carefully flipping through the fragile pages, Walter found detailed notes about raising the special cattle. His father had documented every birth, every crossbreeding, every trait of the animals. And there, on one of the last pages, was a drawing identical to the mark on the bull, a triangle with a spiral. "It's his mark, all right," Walter murmured, moved. Reading further, he discovered his father had sold part of the herd to a breeder named George Blackwell, keeping only the rights to the breeding technique for the bloodline. "Blackwell, the same last name as that businessman," Walter exclaimed. "Must be George's son or grandson." With this new information, Walter felt closer to solving the mystery. In the journal, his father mentioned that the special bloodline wasn't just disease-resistant. It also had a unique ability to adapt to climate changes, something increasingly valuable in an unstable world. "Jesse, I need you to take me to town tomorrow. I'm going to the records office to see if I can find the deed for that sale." At the county clerk's office, Miss Olivia, a white-haired woman who had worked there for over 40 years, helped Walter locate the old documents. "Here it is, old Walter, the partial herd sale deed, dated May 12, 1970. Walter examined the document carefully. Indeed, his father had sold 50 head of cattle to George Blackwell, but with a specific clause. It is agreed that the genetic bloodline known as Southern Cross, identified by the blue triangular brand, remains the intellectual property of Anthony Thompson and may not be commercially reproduced without his express authorization or that of his direct descendants. Miss Olivia, do you know if there are any other documents related to this? Any later transfer of these rights? She adjusted her glasses and typed into the computer. Nothing on record, old Walter. From what I see here, the rights to this bloodline still belong to the Thompson family. You're Anthony's only living heir, aren't you? I am. Armed with this knowledge, Walter felt more confident. When he returned to the farm, he saw the black car parked in the yard again. Jonathan Blackwell was talking to Linda, who looked impressed. "Oh, Mr. Walter," exclaimed the businessman when he saw him, "I was just explaining to your daughter-in-law the benefits of our proposal." Linda had a gleam in her eye that Walter knew well, the gleam of money. "Father Walter, Mr. Blackwell has increased his offer to $100,000. We can pay off all the farm's debts and still have enough left for you to live comfortably." "What debts?" asked Walter, furrowing his brow. Linda hesitated. "The bank debts from the loan you took out last year to fix the roof and the corral. That loan was already paid off, Linda. I showed you the receipt." An awkward silence fell. Jonathan Blackwell cleared his throat. "Well, regardless of debts, my offer stands. $100,000 for the bull, with the possibility of a future partnership in the profits from genetic improvements." Walter stared at the businessman. "Mr. Blackwell, by any chance, are you related to George Blackwell?" The question seemed to catch the man off guard. "George was my grandfather." "Why?" "Because I just discovered your grandfather bought cattle from my father, but not the rights to the genetic lineage. And I believe the bull you're so eager to buy belongs to that lineage." Jonathan's expression shifted subtly. "That was over 50 years ago, Mr. Thompson. Intellectual property rights on animals have an expiration date. Not according to the contract I found today at the courthouse. The clause is quite clear." The two men locked eyes, the tension almost palpable in the air. Linda looked back and forth between them, confused. "What's going on here?" "Your father-in-law seems to think he has some kind of legal claim to a cattle lineage my family has been developing for decades," replied Jonathan with a forced smile. "Developing using the genetic foundation created by my father, without ever paying the rightful dues," Walter shot back. Jonathan Blackwell adjusted his tie, trying to maintain his composure. "Mr. Thompson, I'm a reasonable man. We can settle this amicably. $200,000 for the bull, cash in hand today." Walter crossed his arms. "I'm not interested in selling, Mr. Blackwell, and now I understand why you're so determined to buy this animal. He's not just a descendant of my father's lineage. He's probably one of the few pure specimens left." The businessman narrowed his eyes. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Thompson. A big one." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." When Jonathan Blackwell left, Linda exploded. "Have you lost your mind? Turning down $200,000 for an old bull? He's not just a bull, Linda. He's part of our family's history." "History doesn't pay the bills," she shouted, tears in her eyes. "Robert died working himself to the bone to keep this piece of land, and now you throw away the chance to give his grandchildren a better life." The words hit Walter like a punch. The mention of his late son always left him vulnerable. "I never wanted Robert to work himself to death. He chose to do that. He did it because he loved you and this damn piece of land more than anything." Linda wiped her tears angrily. "Now I see why he said you were too stubborn for your own good." Linda got into the car and left without saying goodbye, leaving Walter with a heavy heart. That night, lying in his lonely bed, he reflected on his decision. Maybe Linda was right. Maybe he was being selfish, denying his grandchildren a better life over sentimentality. The sound of shattering glass interrupted his thoughts. He jumped up and rushed to the window, just in time to see flames rising from the barn. "Fire!" he shouted, running outside still in his pajamas. Jessie, who slept in the back room, also woke to the noise, and both raced to the barn. The flames were already consuming part of the wooden structure. "The bull!" Walter tried to enter, but Jessie held him back. "It's dangerous, old Walter. I'll try to save the animal. You go get help." As Jessie rushed into the burning stable, Walter ran to grab the hose. With his heart racing, he tried to douse the flames, but the fire spread quickly. Minutes later, to his immense relief, he saw Jessie emerging with the bull. The young man was coughing from the smoke but alive, and the animal, frightened but seemingly unharmed. Soon neighbors arrived to help, forming a bucket brigade. By the time Sheriff Morgan showed up, the fire was under control, though the stable was partially destroyed. "You don't need to be an expert to see this was arson," the sheriff said, examining shards of a broken bottle that reeked of gasoline. "I have a good idea who might be behind this," Walter replied, glancing at the bull now safely in the pasture beside the house. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now back to the tale. The stable fire ended up drawing attention from the whole region. The next morning, a reporter from a small local paper showed up to cover the incident. "Mr. Thompson, there are rumors the fire might be linked to a valuable bull you own. Can you comment?" Walter was about to answer when he saw Linda's pickup truck pulling in. To his surprise, Emma and Ethan had come with her. "Grandpa," Emma ran to hug him. "We heard about the fire and came right away. Are you okay?" The emotion of seeing his worried grandchildren softened the tension Walter felt at Linda's presence. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Thanks to Jesse, no one was hurt, and the bull is safe." Ethan, usually more reserved, examined the stables, wreckage with interest. "Did someone really try to kill Hope, Grandpa?" "Looks that way, son." The reporter, sensing the family drama, stepped closer with more questions, but Linda intervened. "My family won't be giving interviews. Please respect our privacy." After the reporter backed off, Linda confronted her father-in-law. "So, you really think that businessman set the stable on fire because of the bull?" "I don't have proof, but there are too many coincidences, don't you think?" Linda seemed uneasy. "Father Walter, what will you do now?" "First rebuild the stable, then figure out exactly what's so special about this bull that someone would risk an arson charge." Emma, who'd been watching the bull in the pasture, chimed in. "I think I can help with that, Grandpa. I can collect samples for analysis at college. We have an amazing animal genetics lab." "You'd do that?" "Of course," the young woman replied eagerly. "Actually, I already told one of my professors about this bull's story, and he was super interested. Professor Harrison is a conservation genetics expert." Linda looked skeptical. "Honey, don't get too wrapped up in this. It could be dangerous." "Mom, it's scientific research, not a police investigation," Emma retorted, rolling her eyes. Walter felt a surge of pride seeing his granddaughter's determination. She'd inherited her great-grandfather's scientific curiosity, skipping a generation. "Let's do it, Emma. I want to know what we're dealing with." In the weeks that followed, as neighbors helped rebuild the stable, Emma collected hair, blood and saliva samples from the bull for analysis. Ethan, who'd initially come only at his mother's insistence, grew interested in the farm and began helping Walter with daily chores. "Grandpa, I found this buried near the old corral," Ethan said one afternoon, holding up a rusted metal object. Walter took it carefully. It was an old cattle branding tool with the same triangle and spiral symbol. "This belonged to your great-grandfather. He used it to mark special cattle before developing the blue ink branding." "That's so cool. Can I keep it?" "Of course you can, son. It's rightfully yours." Ethan carefully cleaned the tool and hung it in his room at the farmhouse, which had been occupied again after years of standing empty. The boy, who once only cared about video games, now woke up early to help milk the cows. One morning, nearly a month after the fire, Emma arrived at the farm excitedly, bringing a middle-aged man with her. "Grandpa, this is Professor Harrison, my advisor at college. He has amazing news about Hope." "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thompson," said the professor, shaking Walter's hand. "Your granddaughter has told me so much about you and this extraordinary bull." Sitting on the porch with fresh coffee served by Jesse, the professor explained the test results. "Mr. Thompson, to put it simply, the bull you have is a genetic treasure. It carries markers for resistance to several diseases affecting cattle today, including some that emerged in recent decades." "How is that possible?" asked Walter, amazed. "It's a rare combination of factors. According to our preliminary studies, the lineage your father developed had an accelerated genetic adaptation rate. In simple terms, these animals evolved faster than ordinary cattle." "And is this valuable?" asked Walter, trying to grasp the significance. The professor smiled. "Priceless, Mr. Thompson. In times of climate change and emerging diseases, a lineage like this could revolutionize Brazilian cattle farming. I'm not surprised someone would be willing to pay a fortune for it. Or try to steal it, Emma added. Exactly, agreed the professor. In fact, I'm also here with a proposal. The university would like to establish a partnership to study this animal and eventually start a controlled breeding program. What kind of partnership? One where you retain all rights to the lineage, but allow us to conduct studies and, with your permission, begin a genetic improvement program that would benefit small farmers. Walter thought for a moment. What about this Blackwell fellow? Won't he try to interfere? He likely will, the professor replied frankly. Companies like his rely on monopolizing certain lineages to keep prices high. Partnering with the university would mean democratizing access to these valuable genetic traits. I like that idea, Walter smiled. My father always said knowledge about the land should be shared, not sold. Before they could continue, a police car pulled into the yard. Sheriff Morgan stepped out with a serious expression. Good morning, old Walter. I need to speak with you about a complaint we received. What complaint? Intellectual property theft. New Frontier Agribusiness claims you're in illegal possession of a genetically modified animal that belongs to them. That's ridiculous, Walter exclaimed. Maybe so, but they have documents that seem to back their claim, the sheriff handed Walter a paper. This is a summons to appear at the station tomorrow, and they've obtained a court order to seize the animal until the matter is resolved. Walter felt his blood boil. They can't do this, Professor Harrison intervened. Sheriff, I'm a genetics professor at the State University. We're conducting official studies on this animal with the owner's permission. Seizing it now would jeopardize ongoing scientific research. The sheriff scratched his head, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Look, I understand the situation, but I have a court order here. The most I can do is give you 48 hours to file a legal appeal. After the sheriff left, the professor made a few calls. Within hours, a lawyer from the university arrived at the farm. Dr. Thornton, specialist in intellectual property and biological patents, introduced the lawyer, a man with indigenous features and a measured way of speaking. We need to act quickly. With the lawyer's help, Walter organized all the documentation. He had found his father's journal, the original sales contract, old photographs, and most importantly, the branding tool Ethan had discovered. This is excellent material, Dr. Thornton said after examining everything, but we need more. Is there any veterinarian or breeder from that time who could testify about the lineage your father developed? Walter thought for a moment. William Parker. He worked with my father for decades and must be about 90 now. Last I heard, he was living with his daughter in Pleasant Valley. We need to find him, the lawyer said. And it would also help to locate other animals that might belong to the same lineage. That would prove New Frontier Agribusiness doesn't have exclusive rights to it. Emma, who had been listening carefully, had an idea. What if we made a public appeal? A social media post asking for information about cattle with the blue triangular brand? The professor smiled. Excellent idea. We can frame it as academic research, which it truly is. Within hours, Emma created a detailed post with photos of the distinctive brand and a brief history of the Southern Cross lineage. The post was shared by her veterinary school classmates and quickly went viral among cattle breeders groups. Meanwhile, Ethan managed to track down William Parker through online searches. The elderly man, still sharp despite his advanced age, was moved to hear from Walter and agreed to give his testimony. The next day, a video call was arranged with William, who confirmed every detail about the special lineage. Anthony Thompson was a genius, a visionary, the old man exclaimed, his eyes bright with memory. He developed that lineage when everyone said it was impossible, and he always refused to sell the secret, even when they offered fortunes. He said it was a legacy for future generations of breeders. Do you remember the agreement with George Blackwell? The lawyer asked. Like it was yesterday, George was greedy. He wanted exclusivity, but Anthony stood firm. He sold the animals but kept the rights to the lineage. I was a witness to the contract myself. The testimony was recorded and added to the case file. Meanwhile, responses to Emma's post began pouring in. Several small breeders from different parts of Kentucky and other states reported having or having had animals with similar markings. Over the years, one of them, Samuel Goodman, sent photos of a steer with the same blue triangular brand. "This steer was a gift from my grandfather to my father back in the 80s, Samuel explained over the phone. "We always thought it was strange that he never got sick even during terrible droughts." Dr. Thornton prepared a strong defense, arguing that the Southern Cross lineage had never been the exclusive property of the Blackwell family, but rather a genetic heritage shared with many small producers over decades, exactly as Anthony Thompson had intended. On the morning of the preliminary hearing, Walter wore his only suit saved for special occasions. Linda, who had kept her distance since their argument, showed up to support him. "Father Walter, I know we've had our differences, but I'm on your side in this fight." "Thank you, Linda. That means a lot to me." In the small-town courthouse, the room was surprisingly packed. Many local breeders came to support Walter, including some who had responded to Emma's post. Jonathan Blackwell arrived accompanied by 3 lawyers and what looked like a team of advisors. The judge, Judge Edward Walnut, was known for his impartiality and expertise in agricultural matters. After hearing the initial arguments from both sides, he asked Jonathan Blackwell a direct question. "Mr. Blackwell, your company claims exclusive ownership of this genetic lineage. Can you present documentation proving the transfer of rights from the Thompson family to your grandfather?" The businessman hesitated. "Your Honor, the transaction took place over 50 years ago. Many documents were lost, but we have records showing my grandfather acquired the entire herd from Anthony Thompson." "A record is not the same as legal documentation," the judge replied. "Mr. Thompson has presented the original contract, with specific clauses regarding lineage rights." One of Blackwell's lawyers intervened. "Your Honor, even if such a contract existed, the statute of limitations for intellectual property rights on genetic resources would have expired." Dr. Thornton stood up. "With all due respect, that would only be true if the Thompson family had abandoned the lineage, but the testimonies and evidence show that the Southern Cross lineage continued to be shared among small producers in accordance with the original breeder's wishes." The judge examined the documentation for several long minutes. "Based on the evidence presented, I deny the request to seize the animal and suspend any claims of exclusivity over the Southern Cross lineage until the final ruling. The bull will remain in Mr. Walter Thompson's custody on the condition that the animal is not removed from the property or sold." The preliminary victory was met with applause from the breeders present. Jonathan Blackwell left quickly, avoiding the local press already gathered in the hallway. On the way back to the farm, Linda seemed thoughtful. "Are you really going through with this project with the university? Wouldn't it be easier to accept Blackwell's offer and end this mess?" Walter gazed at the rural landscape through the car window. "Linda, some things are more important than money. My father believed knowledge about the land should benefit everyone, not just those who can pay the most. But what about the grandchildren? Don't you want to leave them a financial legacy?" "The greatest legacy I can leave is the example of doing what's right, even when it's hard. Besides," Walter smiled, "if this project with the university succeeds, the benefit will be far greater than any amount Blackwell could offer." When they arrived at the farm, they found Emma and Ethan tending to the bull, which was now grazing peacefully in the field beside the house. "So, Grandpa, how did it go?" Ethan asked eagerly. "We won the first battle, son. Hope stays with us and the project with the university can move forward." Emma hugged her grandfather, emotional. "I knew you'd do it. Professor Harrison is thrilled. He says we can start the breeding tests as early as next month." In the days that followed, Pleasant View Farm transformed. A small team from the university set up a field lab in one of the farm's buildings. Veterinary students began interning there, bringing new energy and life to the farm. Ethan, growing more interested by the day, announced he wanted to study agronomy after finishing high school. "Grandpa, I think I've found my calling. I want to learn how to care for the land like you and Great-Grandpa did." Linda, who had initially resisted all the changes, gradually became involved in the project, especially after Professor Harrison explained its long-term economic potential. It's not quick and easy money like selling to Blackwell, but it's a sustainable legacy, he explained. In a few years, this partnership could yield much greater rewards. A month later, just as the first breeding procedures were about to begin, an unexpected visit surprised everyone. An elegant, middle-aged woman stepped out of an unassuming car. "I'm Margaret Blackwell," she introduced herself. "Ricardo's wife. I need to speak with Mr. Thompson in private." Intrigued, Walter invited her to the porch. Linda, suspicious, insisted on staying nearby. "Mr. Thompson, I came here without my husband's knowledge," Margaret began, visibly nervous. "There's something you need to know about his interest in that bull." "I'm listening." "Our main herd is being wiped out by a new disease that appeared about 6 months ago. The vets can't identify the pathogen, and conventional treatments aren't working." "And what does that have to do with my bull?" "Ricardo discovered through old records that a similar situation happened in the 60s, and only the cattle from the Southern Cross bloodline survived. He's desperate, Mr. Thompson. It's not just greed, it's financial survival." Walter pondered the revelation. "Why didn't he explain this from the start? We could have worked on a solution together." Margaret lowered her eyes. "My husband, he doesn't like showing vulnerability. He thought it'd be easier to buy or legally take the animal." "Well, it's too late for that now," Linda cut in. "He already showed what kind of man he is when he tried to burn down our barn." "What?" Margaret seemed genuinely shocked. "Arson. Ricardo would never do such a thing. He can be stubborn, but he'd never resort to violence." Walter and Linda exchanged glances. If it wasn't Blackwell, who would have an interest in destroying the barn or stealing the bull? That same afternoon, during a meeting with the university team, Walter shared Margaret's information. "If this disease is as serious as she says, it could be a threat to every rancher in the area," he concluded. Professor Harrison agreed. "We need to look into this immediately. If true, our project becomes even more important." As they discussed, Ethan rushed into the room. "Grandpa, Sheriff Morgan is here with a man in handcuffs. Says they caught the person who tried to burn the barn." To everyone's surprise, the arsonist had no connection to Blackwell. He was a former employee of a mining company trying to buy land in the area for exploitation. "He confessed he was hired to scare you," the sheriff explained. "The idea was to pressure you into selling the farm out of fear." "But who hired him?" Walter asked, confused. The sheriff glanced at Linda, visibly uncomfortable. "According to him, it was a real estate agent named Susan Appleton. Said she offered a generous commission if he could convince the owner to sell." Linda paled. "Susan is my friend. I never imagined she'd do something like this." Walter felt a pain in his chest that wasn't physical. "Linda, did you know about this?" "Of course not, Father Walter," she replied, offended. "It's true I talked to Susan about possibly selling the farm someday, but I'd never agreed to criminal methods." The sheriff promised to investigate further and left with the suspect. A heavy silence fell over the family. "Why is Susan so interested in the farm?" Emma asked, trying to understand. "It's a nice property, but it doesn't seem worth this kind of criminal effort." It was Jesse who answered. "There's ore here. Lots of folks know that. Grandpa Anthony, Walter's father, already turned down offers from the mining company back in the 70s. They say there's a vein of iron running right under the farm." "That would explain a lot," remarked Professor Harrison, "including the sudden interest from so many buyers." Linda seemed genuinely shaken. "Father Walter, I swear I didn't know any of this. Susan always said she had a client interested in turning the place into a rural inn." "I believe you, Linda," Walter replied after a long pause. "But this just proves what I've been saying for years. This piece of land is worth more than we realize, and not just in money." The following days brought new revelations. The investigation confirmed that Susan Appleton had been working as a middlewoman for an international mining company. The real estate agent was arrested, and the case made headlines in the regional media. Jonathan Blackwell, upon learning of the real arsonist's arrest, sought out Walter to clarify the situation. "Mr. Thompson, I came personally to apologize for the accusations and the way I handled the negotiations," he said, visibly uncomfortable in the simple surroundings of Pleasant View Farm. "My wife told me about her visit." "She mentioned a mysterious illness affecting your herd," Walter replied. "It's true, we've already lost nearly 30% of the animals and no treatment works. The vets suspect a mutation of a known virus. adapted to climate changes. Professor Harrison, who was part of the conversation, intervened. "Mr. Blackwell, we're starting a research project that could benefit all the ranchers in the region, including you. Instead of competing for control of the bloodline, we could collaborate." Jonathan hesitated. "A collaborative project? With the university and small producers? I'm not sure our shareholders would approve." "Think about it," Walter insisted. "Alone you might eventually save your herd. But if the disease spreads across the region, what good will that do? My father always said, 'In the country, those who isolate themselves perish.'" The conversation continued for hours, with the professor explaining the technical details of the project. In the end, Jonathan, still reluctant but seeing the potential, agreed to participate as one of the partners, not as the sole controller. "I can invest in infrastructure that would benefit the whole project," he offered. "And our company has international connections that could aid the research." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. A week later, a simple ceremony marked the official launch of the Southern Cross Project. Representatives from the university, small local producers, local authorities, and even Jonathan Blackwell gathered at Pleasant View Farm. Walter, moved, gave a brief speech. "My father dreamed of a day when knowledge about the land could be shared for everyone's benefit. Today, thanks to a bull nobody wanted, we're making that dream come true." Linda, who had gone through deep reflection after recent events, hugged her father-in-law with tears in her eyes. "Forgive me for doubting you, for pushing so hard to sell. You always knew what was truly important." The first results of the project came faster than expected. Tests confirmed that Hope the bull did indeed have a natural resistance to the mysterious disease affecting Blackwell's herd, and the first crossbreeds showed this trait was hereditary. Emma, who had become Professor Harrison's official assistant, was overjoyed by the discoveries. "Grandpa, Hope is helping create a new generation of resistant cattle. In a few years, the benefits for American ranching will be enormous." Ethan, inspired by the activity at the farm, began developing a small garden of traditional medicinal plants, reviving knowledge Walter had learned from his father. "If the special cattle came from unique feeding, like you always say, Grandpa, it makes sense to study the plants in the region too," the young man explained, pointing to a neatly arranged bed of different herbs. Pleasant View Farm, which once seemed destined to be sold and forgotten, had transformed into a center for research and preservation of traditional knowledge. Small farmers from the area began visiting to learn sustainable management techniques and take part in the genetic improvement program. One day, as Walter watched the activity on the farm from his porch, Jonathan Blackwell approached with a folder in hand. "Mr. Thompson, I found something in the company archives that might interest you," he said, handing over the folder. "These are letters exchanged between my grandfather and your father over the years." Intrigued, Walter opened the folder. To his surprise, he found dozens of handwritten letters, revealing a friendship that had remained hidden by distance and time. "It seems they kept collaborating in secret," Jonathan explained. "My grandfather provided capital and equipment, and your father shared his knowledge and instincts about cattle. It was an unofficial partnership." "Why keep it secret?" "From what I gathered in the letters, it was to protect the bloodline. If other big breeders had discovered its true potential, they would have tried to buy everything, monopolize it. By maintaining the appearance of competitors, they managed to develop the lineage without drawing unwanted attention. The revelation changed Walter's perspective on his family's history. What had seemed like a simple business rivalry was, in truth, a sophisticated strategy to preserve something valuable for future generations. 6 months after the project began, an international scientific publication highlighted Professor Harrison's team's discoveries about the Southern Cross lineage. The article mentioned its natural resistance to different pathogens and exceptional adaptability to climate changes. "We're getting inquiries from researchers all over the world," the professor reported proudly. "What your father started decades ago is revolutionizing our understanding of natural genetic adaptation." To celebrate the project's early success and honor Anthony Thompson's memory, a field day was organized at Pleasant View Farm. Breeders, students, researchers, and curious visitors from across the region came to see the place and the famous cattle that had started it all. Among the visitors, Walter recognized a familiar face, Samuel Goodman, the breeder who had sent photos of his cattle with the blue triangular brand. "Old Walter, I brought something I think you'll find interesting," Samuel said, pulling a wooden box from his truck. "My grandfather kept this for years, said it might be important one day." The box contained a notebook with the same handwriting as the journal Walter had found, his father's script. It held notes on breeding and treatments, with dates stretching up to just a few years before his death. "My grandfather said your father kept working in secret, distributing calves from the special herd among trusted breeders to ensure the lineage wouldn't be lost." Walter felt his eyes well up. "So he never gave up?" "Never," Samuel smiled. "And now you haven't either. The circle is complete." The celebration lasted until nightfall. Under a springtime starry sky, local musicians played folk tunes on their guitars as people of different generations shared stories about the land, the animals, and the old traditions that now found new value in the modern world. Linda, who had finally understood the farm's true worth, organized a small tribute. In the center of the yard, a plaque was unveiled. Southern Cross Project, in memory of Anthony Thompson, who knew the true value of land lies in shared knowledge. As the guests began to leave, Walter stood on the porch, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. The steer Hope grazed peacefully in the field, now accompanied by several calves born from the breeding program. "You seem pleased," Jesse remarked, bringing a cup of coffee to his boss. "I'm at peace, Jesse. I finally understand what my father tried to teach me my whole life, that some things are priceless and that true legacy isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we share." Emma and Ethan joined their grandfather on the porch, bringing along Professor Harrison and some students. "Grandpa, we did it," Emma announced excitedly. "The tests confirmed the calves inherited the genetic resistance. The lineage is safe now." "And we have more news," the professor added. "The university has been approached by state officials. They want to turn the Southern Cross Project into an official genetic preservation program for sustainable cattle farming. That means more resources and legal protection for everything we're doing," Ethan explained, now speaking about the project with the same passion as his grandfather. Walter smiled, feeling deep satisfaction. From a simple impulse, at a livestock auction, an act of compassion for a sick animal, had grown something that would now benefit countless people. That night before bed, Walter flipped through his father's notebook found by Samuel. On the last page, a brief note caught his attention. "The true treasure of the land isn't in what we take from it, but in what we learn from it. This knowledge doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all who know how to respect life in its many forms. One day, perhaps, my son will understand this fully." Tears in his eyes, Walter closed the notebook. "I understand, Father. It took time, but I finally do." A year after the project began, Pleasant View Farm had become a model of integration between traditional knowledge and modern science. Professor Harrison's team, now permanently stationed on the property, developed a vaccine based on the Southern cross-lineage genetics, promising to protect cattle against the mysterious disease threatening herds across the region. Linda, who had initially seen only the farm's monetary value, turned part of the house into a small museum that told the story of the special lineage and preserved the memory of Anthony Thompson. Visitors from all over the country came to see the initiative. Ethan, inspired by the work on the farm, was accepted into an agronomy program and already spoke of implementing new sustainable techniques on the property after graduation. "Grandpa, I think I've found my life's purpose," he said during a celebratory dinner. "I want to continue what you and my great-grandfather started." Emma, now a veterinary graduate, received offers for master's programs from several universities, but chose to stay with the project, developing her research on the genetic adaptability of the Southern Cross cattle. The steer Hope, who had sparked this entire transformation, became something of a mascot for the project. Fully recovered and healthy, the animal often accompanied Walter on his morning walks around the property, like an old friend. One such morning, as he watched the sunrise over the farm's lush pastures, Walter had an epiphany. That steer, bought out of compassion at an auction where no one else wanted him, wasn't just an animal with valuable genes. He was a symbol of how small acts of kindness can set in motion changes far greater than we could ever imagine. "Some creatures deserve a second chance," he murmured, repeating the words he had spoken a year before when questioned about buying the sick animal. The steer, as if understanding, came closer and pressed its muzzle against the old farmer's shoulder. End of story. Dear listener, if you were moved by old Walter and the steer Hope's journey, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and share in the comments. What value do you believe is most important to preserve for future generations? Your opinion is a treasure to us.